Welcome to the Boston City Council Chamber. My name is Michelle Wu, and I'm the chair of the Committee on Planning, Development, and Transportation. I'm joined by my colleague, District 2 City Councilor Ed Flynn, and I believe others may join us over the course of the hearing. Today, we are here to discuss docket number 0736, a hearing order regarding the City Council's biannual urban renewal progress updates with the Boston Planning and Development Agency. I want to remind everyone that this public hearing is being recorded and broadcast live on channels Comcast 8, RCN 82, and Verizon 1964, as well as streaming on the City of Boston website. So please silence your cell phones and other devices. We will take public testimony throughout the hearing. So how I would like to proceed is to give my colleague an opportunity to give an opening statement, and then I will read the few names that have already signed up for public testimony. So if folks wish to testify now, feel free. I know it can be sometimes a long wait. If you would rather see the presentation first and then testify after that, feel free to defer as well, but I want to give some opportunity at the beginning, given schedules for members of the public. After that bit of testimony concludes, we will hand it over to the panel of distinguished guests and representatives from the Boston Planning and Development Agency to give their presentation, and then take question and answers from counselors, and then more public testimony at the end. Everyone good? Okay, so the names that I have, and we are joined also by at-large City Councilor Anissa Asabi-George. So just so you are ready, the names that I have are David Goggins, Victor Bronya, Ford Cavallari, and Elliot Laffer. So that's the order if you all wish to get your thoughts together. And I'll pass it over to my colleagues for an opening statement if they wish to make one. Councillor Flynn.
Thank you, Councilor Wu, and thank you to the members of the panel for being here with us, and to the members that have come to discuss urban renewal. It's an issue that the city's been dealing with for many years. It provides great power into the hands of the BPDA, the BRA, but also as neighbors, as residents, we also want to make sure that the neighborhood voice is always part of this process. That's the job of the mayor and the district city councilors and the city councilors at large, making sure that the residents have a voice on development issues. It's a great piece of power that the BRA has, and at times it has not used that power or discretion in the best interest of the city, as we look at what happened at the West End, at one time one of the most diverse neighborhoods, not only in the city but in the country. So that's where I'm coming from. I'm a strong believer in making sure that our neighborhoods are diverse. Long-time residents, low-income residents, immigrants have the opportunity to live and stay in Boston. So I'm looking forward to working with the BPDA and with the residents that are here and that are listening as well throughout our neighborhoods, and making sure that the neighborhood voice is heard in this process. And thank you, Councilor Wu, and to the panelists for being here.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn. Councillor Asabi-George?
I don't have an opening statement. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So we'll move to, would any of those four members of the public wish to testify now? You'd prefer to, feel free to come, defer to after. Okay, great. So then if our panelists could please introduce themselves, and feel free to make any opening statement or dive right into the presentation. Renee?
Great, thank you. Good morning, Chairman Wu and members of the council. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. For the record, my name is Renee Lefebvre, General Counsel of the Boston Planning and Development Agency. As part of the 2016 Urban Renewal Extension approvals, we agreed to provide you regular updates on the progress of our work. Today, we're pleased to provide you a fifth update regarding our urban renewal activities. Joining me today are Devin Quirk, Director of Real Estate, and Christopher Bream, Special Project Manager. We are here to provide you an update on the status of the commitments made in the 2016 Action Plan. First, per the minor modifications procedures, we are continuing to notify the City Council and DHCD of all minor modifications to our urban renewal plans. Per the conciliation agreement for the South End, notification of minor modifications within the South End Urban Renewal Plan area are also provided to state legislators that represent those areas impacted by the minor modification. We also have been providing the City Council with digital copies of minor modification notices by email. In addition, we are notifying district city councilors of community meetings that the BPDA holds for dispositions of individual urban renewal parcels. Second, we have updated our technology and website to better reflect our urban renewal activities. The presentations and links to the videos of our last 4 City Council updates are available on our website. We have provided a link that any member of the public can click on, which generates an inquiry to our Urban Renewal Project Manager, who has been able to help with any specific inquiry regarding urban renewal. We are continuing to digitize all documents collected, both internal and external, so that they are as easily accessible to our staff to respond more quickly to inquiries. We are now able to respond to any constituent inquiry regarding specifics about an urban renewal parcel in a matter of minutes instead of days or weeks. Through our urban renewal webpage, we are able to provide a user-friendly table linking to urban renewal plans, modification lists, notification letters, and maps. Over the past 2 years, we have gone through thousands of documents, prioritizing accuracy and thoroughness to ensure that we have laid the best foundation for the next steps and work ahead. We have been able to complete this work and now have a comprehensive land disposition agreement inventory that takes stock of all urban renewal parcels in the City of Boston, giving us granular details on land use, open space requirements, and affordable housing covenants across the city. This inventory has been a collaborative effort of multiple departments at the BPDA, including archives, real estate, legal, GIS, MIS, and the planning departments. In addition, this search has given us a fuller picture of properties with deed restrictions, leases, and hundreds of properties that we own across urban renewal areas. As we complete our data searches, we have been working to add urban renewal information to the BPDA's online zoning viewer. We are actively working to ensure that this online tool is functioning and functioning optimally prior to going live, displaying not only urban renewal areas, but parcels that be subject to urban renewal plans, land use restrictions, and other covenants as well. Our goal is to have this zoning viewer live and available on our website by the start of our upcoming community engagement process. Third, the action plan asks that we examine our existing procedures for the disposition of BPDA-owned land and to revise protocols accordingly in such a manner that reflects community planning goals and priorities. All land dispositions involve a community process that solicits feedback from the surrounding neighborhood stakeholders. This feedback is then incorporated into community planning goals and priorities. Finally, we have met with DHCD to ensure that they are aware of the progress made to date and to coordinate expectations and timelines for our next steps. We have agreed to provide DHCD with a written proposal outlining our community engagement and feedback from community meetings and any proposals for changes to the urban renewal areas in August of this year. Looking forward to the next milestone in our action plan, I will now turn it over to Chris Breen, who will outline our community engagement strategy.
Thank you, Renee and councilors. Being able to include community input in our timetable for potentially sunsetting certain urban renewal plans, reevaluating boundaries of others, making recommendations for modifications, or exploring new urban renewal plan areas is of the utmost importance to us. For these reasons, as part of the community process, I'll be putting together a cross-functional team that includes both real estate and planning department staff, who will help lead the community discussion in all 16 urban renewal areas in the city. The goal of our community discussions will be to provide multiple opportunities for the public to learn more about their urban renewal plan areas and provide input into our work and its future. This engagement plan will consist of not only 16 community meetings entering into each urban renewal area, but I will also be hosting regular office hours in every neighborhood to allow for anyone in the community to drop in and meet with me directly to learn more or provide additional feedback. All presentations given at the community meetings will be posted on our website for anyone who is unable to attend our meetings, and our website will allow for public comments and input throughout this process. I will also be issuing a report of findings from these meetings included with those comments from the attendees. The community engagement largely will be done in 3 phases. The first phase will focus on 6 urban renewal areas: Brunswick King, Park Plaza, Kittredge, North Station, Central Business District School Franklin, and CBD Boylston, Essex. Phase 2 will consist of Campus High School, South Station, South Cove, Fenway, and Downtown Waterfront. Phase 3 will consist of Charlestown, Government Center, South End, Washington Park, and West End. The agenda for each neighborhood check-in will consist of 5 main items. First, we will go over urban renewal background, giving a base layer of terms and tools to anyone unfamiliar with urban renewal. Second, we will review the action plan, much of which the council has seen in our biannual check-ins. Third, we will review the LDA inventory for that specific area and introduce the new zoning viewer UR layer. Fourth, we will review the BRA-owned land in each area, which could help inform any future RFPs. And lastly, we will discuss boundary changes or any possible extension or sunsetting of urban renewal for that area. Overall, my hope for this process is to educate and inform the public on the work done to date and the resources that are available, as well as give them an opportunity to provide feedback into the future of each urban renewal area. Thank you.
Thanks for that presentation, Chris. And I also just want to thank the chair and the members of the council for having us here today. I'm Devin Quirk, and as Director of Real Estate for the agency, I just want to reiterate our commitment to transparency, inclusivity, equity, and fairness in the way we conduct our real estate leases and sales. And this is really true across our real estate practice, but it's of perhaps even greater importance in our urban renewal areas. A great example of the community-driven approach to public real estate development is the recent work the BPDA and the Department of Neighborhood Development have partnered on in Dudley Square. After 2 years of community process to define the goals for 8 publicly owned properties in the Dudley area, we're now putting out RFPs for the redevelopment of these sites. When built, more than 2/3 of the units constructed will be income-restricted affordable housing, while also creating good jobs and community-focused public amenities like neighborhood retail and public open space. A priority of mine as I've stepped into this role has been to establish a firm accounting of all BPDA properties and near-term priorities for disposition. Ultimately, we're prioritizing property sales in 3 areas. The first is economic development. These are properties that could create good jobs and catalyze Boston's economy. The second is community development, and these are properties that could create strong benefits for nearby community members, including affordable housing, new retail, and open space. And the third, and what we're here to talk about today, is urban renewal. And there are some urban renewal areas that are either very small or have few BPDA properties left in them. And we want to move quickly to complete the goals of urban renewal in these areas, since it's achievable to do so in the short term. But regardless of priority, we are certainly committed to a full community process in all of our property disposition work. Community feedback is a key portion of our planning and disposition activity, and we will continue to engage community members, stakeholders, and this council in efforts to use public land for the greatest public good. And that concludes our testimony. We'd love to answer your questions.
Thank you very much. I just want to check, anyone from the public wish to testify now given scheduling, or would you like counselors to engage? Okay, this is great. They're hoping to absorb the full experience before chiming in. So I have a few questions, and I will try to hold myself to a time limit before passing it on to colleagues. So I think there are some issues that have come up, check-in after check-in, in terms of what exactly some certain terminology in that approval extension letter from the DHCD meant. So we had done some more digging, and my office finally got a response from DHCD on two pieces that we had been thinking about. So just want to, I think, more, not for you all, but for the public, report back on that, which is that there'd been some discussion about what the term, quote, mere temporal meant, in the language that a mere temporal extension would be categorized as a minor modification, which would not need a city council vote. And the question was, was mere the functional word, meaning was it just a short time extension, wouldn't count, wouldn't need a council approval, or was it mere temporal, meaning if you were only extending the time rather than boundaries, then you wouldn't have to go to the council. DHCD's communication to us that it was mere temporal as a phrase, and so if you are not changing boundaries, for example, and just asking for more time, they legally would view it as a minor modification and would not require a council vote. Our communication throughout this process with the BPDA has said that regardless of what was decided there, the BPDA would come before the council and seek that approval. We had discussed just getting that understanding in writing through a letter, and I went back and checked my email, and I think we had followed up after one of the check-ins back in 2017, and then got a commitment to get the letter, but then never actually got the letter. So just a pleasant reminder. If I missed it, it could be on me, but
I believe we did provide the letter, Councilor Wu, but I will.
okay, if
I'll
you could
confirm,
re-forward it, that
yes.
would be great. I couldn't find it in my direct
If not, I'll
records.
come down and hand deliver it.
Thank you. That would be wonderful. And then the other point that we checked in on was just around what it meant in one of the provisions that the BPDA would have to verify or confirm some sort of plan for what you will do at the 3-year mark, so that August 2019 mark. And DHCD said to us that it didn't mean, as I initially thought, that you would need to have a completed sense of what you were going to do with boundaries, sunsetting, extensions, but just that there would essentially be a check-in on what your plan was to have a process to get to the point where you have a completed proposal. So I just wanted to report back on that. And then along those lines, what do you anticipate bringing before DHCD at that August 2019 sort of deadline?
I think it might make sense for me to answer because we met with DHCD to discuss what they would expect to see from the BPDA by August 2019. And so first and foremost, they asked us for a written proposal so that we have something concrete in writing. But what we did talk to them about was the fact that we are going out to do a community engagement series of meetings that Chris just went over today, and that based on those meetings and the feedback that we get from the community, that we would then be able to formulate proposals for possible changes to the urban renewal plans and report that to DHCD. So that is why at that time, by August of this year, we won't include in our proposal that we're going to, what plans, we might want to do a boundary change here or there, but include, or we might, depending on the community process that we're running that's going to start pretty much right after this hearing. Chris has already started setting up meetings, but so that process will be able to guide us in terms of what we will be proposing.
So the phase 2 and 3 have months on here that are after August, so it starts in September. So is the idea that you're just focusing on, the community process is only going to focus on these 6 areas, and so that's all you will have run before the August sort of proposal to DHCD?
Yeah, that'll be the first phase. Like, all phases will go through a community process, but those are the ones I'm going to get done prior to August and give back a report on those. And then I think I can get it done by late fall, early winter, if I need to speed it up to phase 2 and 3 and get a report in as early as DHCD.
Oh,
or
so
you
are
guys.
these months next to phase 2 and 3, are those when it is finished or when it starts? So
That would be when phase 2 starts.
Okay,
I
right.
didn't want to do it over summer, too much with people, so I can do it as quickly as people want because all the presentations are ready to go. So I could do phase 2 and phase 3 pretty quickly if there was a need to get in those reports.
But just to clarify, so Renee, you said that when you propose, give your written proposal in August 2019 to DHCD, you're hoping that it will be based on some community feedback, but most of the community feedback for 10 out of the 16 areas is currently not planned to have been started by
Yeah,
August.
so they did say to us that we can include in our proposal where we are to date. And based on the fact that they saw that our timeline was to finish the community process, by the end of the year, they were comfortable with us then going back and providing update to the feedback that we get on the community process run after August 19.
Okay, so in August, you will have some proposal, not just for these first 6, but for all of them.
Yes.
And that might be revised at the end of the year, once you wrap up community process for everything. So there will kind of be an initial proposal and then a final proposal probably by December of 2019, or by when?
Early next year.
Of 2020, okay.
Yeah,
More like January, February.
yeah, depending on what's comfortable for people.
In the community.
Okay. And do you have any early sense of where you might sunset or extend or look to change boundaries?
Well, we know just based on the phasing of how we're doing it, that given the phasing, we can get a sense of the plans that will be easier for us to come up with proposals, because we left the largest ones at the end. And one of the reasons why we did that was that we were hoping that as we do the smaller ones in the first phase or 2, that we would also have some more guidance as to if we are going to, just allow a plan to sunset or look at a boundary change, that we would also be working with the community as well as DHCD on the proposal to do that, because they had told us, there are ways to do it. You could amend a plan, or you could sunset a plan, or so we thought that given, there's going to be so many options depending on the community input that we receive, that we'd wait and see what happens there.
And then certainly the first phase, those 6 were chosen by me because they're the most manageable. Janet Carlson went through every property we own and how to dispose of it. So there's certainly, as long as the community was on board, whatever they chose, but those are the 6 most manageable areas.
Meaning most likely to sunset?
Yeah, depending on the community's feelings
Yes.
about that.
Okay, so just to clarify, and then I'm going to pass it to Councilor Flynn, because I want to make sure I'm not hogging all the time. Just to clarify, when you are doing these, when you go out and do the community process in each urban renewal area, you have the 5 agenda items, but are you proposing anything specific for are you giving the community something to react to, or are you just taking it, and how do you get from the decision of which option to choose?
For individual parcels that we own, I envisioned, it's right next to a park. It has a Parks Department sign on it. It should go to the parks. For whatever reason, we wound up with it. It needs to go to a park. Or it's behind someone's house. It could be used for parking behind that person's house. You can't really do much with it. But there are parcels that are sort of empty, vacant lots that it's really up to the community. Does the community want a garden? Do they want housing? And that will be open to them to decide. In terms of, is the boundary changed, or is it extended or terminated? It's really opened up to them based on the data that I give them. If I say we have these amount of parcels available, and if we lose urban renewal, we're kind of stuck with those parcels. Like, you won't be able to develop them or turn them into a community center and stuff like that. Like, you can base your information based on that sort of data, I guess.
Is that really true, though, that you won't be able to develop them or turn them into anything after urban renewal goes away?
Well, it just, some of the titles are extremely complicated. They need to be cleared. Janet went through it with me, and some of the things are very, very, very complicated in order to develop, so.
So, and then, based on what Chris is referring to about, sort of the community input on the specific parcels, what we are also doing is working then on, depending on what parcels are being disposed of, which ones we're finishing, we are also working with our planning and zoning folks so that we can also put some of the land use controls that we might want to keep, how we're going to implement those through planning and zoning, and then work with our planning and zoning folks on then looking at the plan, and depending on what parcels are left or what parcels we've then gotten rid of, can we change boundaries? And then we would go out and propose that and work with the community on that. So that's sort of how, I know your question was, how do you get from the community outreach on the specific parcels to a proposal back to the community? And that's what that would entail.
And I think the meetings that Chris was talking about is sort of an initial overview of urban renewal itself. Some of the land transfers that might be proposed are relatively simple intergovernmental transfers, and we would probably get those done pretty quickly. But I think some of the more complex decision-making and community engagement, we would then move out of a sort of specific urban renewal conversation to a property-specific planning and disposition process. And to your question about whether or not we would be able to develop property without urban renewal, I think, as Chris mentioned, some of these properties are very complex in their ownership histories, so there are certain powers urban renewal gives us that would allow us to move those properties more quickly with urban renewal. And then, and this will be part of the community conversation, in different urban renewal areas, there are different types of land disposition agreements and restrictions and urban renewal restrictions, and some would survive urban renewal and some would not. And I think we need to be able to communicate pretty clearly around what are the risks involved with sunsetting urban renewal for the properties that have urban renewal restrictions within this particular zone.
Yeah, it seems fair to frame it to the community as there would need to be maybe a more drawn out or complicated or, more community process involved in developing, but I don't think it's fair to say, take it or leave it, you're not going to be able to do
it's not a
anything.
could not, it would be a harder.
So, and then my last comment on this round is that it just doesn't feel like the timeline is feasible. If you're trying to wrap with a final proposal by January, February of 2020, and you're going through parcel by parcel with folks, and you're planning to start the largest parcels, for example, the south end in January, that you will be wrapped with that. I mean, it just feels like the last ones should take even more time then, and if they're starting in January, there's no way you're wrapping in January, and it might be well into.
We spoke to DHC about that. We very well might be asking for more time on these proposals, and what they suggested was, again, because of the phasing, and we're trying to do the ones that we think are most manageable first, see how that goes, provide us the written proposal so we can see and look at what's in front of us, and then act accordingly. Basically, if we need to make changes or if we need to work with them, that we would do that.
And it also depends on the level of detail community members might be expecting. So a broad overview of urban renewal and the path forward for the next 3 years might be feasible in the timeline, but if a parcel by parcel specific planning exercise probably is not.
It sounded like that's what you were proposing, though.
Certainly in the
So it is
early
not.
ones we're proposing
I
that,
see.
and the
Okay,
larger
got it,
ones,
got it.
we're sort
Okay,
of
all right.
crafting.
I'm done for this round. I'm so sorry, Councilor Flynn.
Well, thank you, Councilor Wu. I agree. I would want to make sure that we take our time and get this right, and make sure that we give the neighborhood residents the opportunity to weigh in and let their voice be heard. I would rather not rush this at all. But I want to take our time, learn about it, and educate. I think we also have to educate many new people from the city that may have been here over the last 5 years or 10 years about the great powers of urban renewal, and the history also of urban renewal is also part of the conversation, and it should be part of the conversation going forward as well. So that's what I want to see, is a robust, engaging process with the neighborhood, and talking about why it benefits the neighborhood. I know I have an idea why it benefits the BPDA, but why would this benefit residents? Why would it benefit a neighborhood? Are we also considering affordable housing as part of this for the elderly, for low-income families, for seniors, for veterans, for immigrants, for people that are having a difficult time affording rents in Boston? What impact will this have on those residents? Those are the questions I'm going to ask, and I hope to get answers on. But can you give a little bit of background now on what type of impact will it have on those that want to continue staying in Boston and those that want to live in Boston that may not have the funds or the means to do that?
So I can start by speaking to what we're doing with our property, and I think the colleagues could talk about how that urban renewal powers themselves assist with that. But I think certainly, like I mentioned in the opening statement, public participation in planning the future of our land is critically important to us. Using our land for public good wherever possible is critically important to us. And I think in recent years we certainly have a history of doing that. At parcel P12 on Tremont Street in Chinatown, we're doing both affordable homeownership and affordable condo development. We're in Dudley Square, as I mentioned, we're focused on using public land to do 2/3 affordable housing. Senior housing has definitely been a major focus of that. I know there's been property in Charlestown that's been recently developed to be 100% affordable housing that was urban rural BPDA-owned land. So while we have to be very thoughtful about how our land is used and make sure that we get appropriate public value in what we do with our real estate, that public value doesn't always have to be dollars, right? It can often be measured in public benefits. So it's critically important to us and at the BPDA to be good fiscal stewards of the city's real estate.
I support what you just said, is making sure that that great power is used to benefit the people in terms of housing for our seniors and low-income families and the elderly, and maybe even parks and open space.
And jobs.
And jobs. But has it also, on the other hand, benefited others that may not need that land or need that access, such as major businesses, major corporations? Is that also a factor?
Certainly, when we're looking at what to do with BPDA-owned real estate, we're thinking about what's the highest and best use, right? And if the property can be a major job center or a major employer, and it's located in a particular area that's suitable for that, that would certainly be something that we would consider. And that would be part of the community process as we're talking about what to do with that real estate. So I don't want to give the impression that 100% of all BPD assets would be used for affordable housing uses. You're right, parks and open space uses are really important. Oftentimes the best owner of a currently owned BPD asset is just the property owner next door, the homeowner next door. It's a small sliver lot that was taken as a blight taking in the 60s or 70s and really should just go back to neighborhood ownership. And so we generally do that with an open space restriction to ensure that something wasn't built there in the future that the community would disagree with. But those are relatively simple transactions, but they take quite a bit of time. So it's sort of an all of the above type of answer.
I also come from this as someone that served 30 years in the military, and after every activity we do, we kind of do an after-action report of what went well and what didn't go so well. Over the last 30 years, have you ever done an inventory on BRA, BPDA property on some great accomplishments that you have done in terms of building affordable housing for the people? And on the other hand, have you said to yourself, you know, we got this one slip away, we didn't really follow through on it, the taxpayers really weren't heard, or the neighborhood wasn't heard? I like to learn about the good and the bad, because when I make decisions, I factor that in. And so I want to hear the very good news that you're giving, but I also want to hear the bad news as well. And if you are able to give me a brief update on what some of the struggles or disappointments that we've had over the last 25 years.
Yeah.
I think when I go out and do the community engagement, because of the LDA inventory and some of the knowledge that I've gathered from that, like I'd be able to sort of go over some of the highlights, like in Charlestown, like say, you know, we built a college, like some of the good things that came out of urban renewal. And then we also have large empty lots that are going underutilized. So I can also go through some of like the bad things or potential things that have potential to be turned around and maybe redeveloped with urban renewal tools.
I'm not so much concerned on empty lots that haven't been redeveloped. I'm more concerned about empty lots that we gave away for a song, where the taxpayers really didn't get the price that they should have got. Is that the case, that we've seen any of that type of development over the last 30 years? That's what I would be interested in.
So, Councillor Flynn, we can certainly come back, take a look at our properties, particularly the ones with land disposition agreements, because those are the ones I believe you'd be referring to. There have been maybe one or two, at least that I know of my time, where it's not so much that we gave something away for a song, but that what happened was, you know, around 2008, 2009, property owners that redevelopers that we had designated for properties came back to us because they could not finance their projects at that time. So we made changes to allow them to finance, and those changes now, today, as the market changed, because they were, you know, permanent to their deal, they appear now to look as though we lost value there, but in fact, we could not get those projects financed without working with the redevelopers to make those changes. But those properties might be the ones that you'd probably be interested in looking at and seeing how we implemented what we did there, and maybe we can examine and see if there's things that we could do differently today.
And there's a long history, too, so looking, as I'm educating myself on our past property sales, there are certainly properties that we gave away to a budding property owner for $1. And taken from today's perspective, it's like, wow, that's worth quite, any land in Boston is worth quite a bit more than $1 today. But in the 80s and 90s in Boston, it was better to get that property in the hands of someone who could be a good steward of it. So I think looking backwards, it's easy to criticize. We would not make that deal again today because 1,000 square feet of open land has substantial value in our city. But at the time, it didn't. But you're asking a good question about how we learn from our mistakes, and I think we can certainly report back on that.
Have there been cases when we've had city-owned property and it went out to a development, and then that city property or the streets around it have then become private ways and not access to residents?
I wouldn't know off the top of my head. I don't know if Renee, you know.
I would have to.
Yeah, we'd have to look into that one.
Okay. Could you check down at the South Boston waterfront for me on that issue? So on the phase one, I'd be interested if you could give us a brief rundown on those 6 locations. Mm-hmm. What you hope to accomplish and how it benefits the residents.
Ultimately, I just hope to accomplish a couple things. One, making the residents aware of urban renewal, because not all of them are, making them aware of where the LDAs are, what an LDA is, and if it had it to be changed, what that process is like. Beyond that, a history of urban renewal, as you stated, the good and the bad. We are the city we are because of urban renewal. We are one city, and I'm trying to go out to each 16 urban renewal areas, because I'm not sure that's ever been done by the BRA, to go out to every individual area and talk to those people and get their feelings on or how they were affected by urban renewal, and get their feelings on and how we can change it or what they'd like to see in their particular areas, if we could benefit them, if there's something that they needed, if it was a community center, something like that, and we had open land, and that would, a daycare center, and that would benefit them, I would take all that information back and certainly quantify it into a report and understand like what the focus is, whether it's open space, whether it's, you know, residential parcels that they needed in Roxbury for affordable housing. And then ultimately go over them, like the properties that we do own, and sort of try to organize them as a group. And if they wanted to do something like community garden, try to form them into one and allow them to sort of spearhead that and form their own little connections. And then beyond that, the fifth would be just a deep dive into, you know, what happens next and what would you like to see happen next. If I've shown you that urban renewal has been a good thing and it's a powerful thing and it's a tool for development and a tool for affordable housing, and you want to keep it, great. If you feel that the plan's done and we accomplished our job, that's great. As long as everyone walks away understanding what urban renewal is, understanding why it occurred, and understanding the good and the bad that happened from it, and understanding that the BPDA's goal is to better the community, I think that those are the ultimate goals. It's not an adversarial. It's not, we're not in it for the money, we're in it for the community good. And I'm just gonna listen to them and report back internally and report back to you guys at the council, both before I go out there and after, to debrief every single meeting with you or your aides. And we're gonna take it together, us, the council, the HCD, these guys, and we're gonna do what's right.
And if your question is about specific geographies, then the actual names of the urban renewal areas are sometimes hard to interpret. The three of them are downtown focused, and three are Roxbury, parts of Roxbury focused.
Yeah, I just wanted to let you know on phase 1, 2, and 3, a lot of the property is in my district.
Yes.
So I would be, I'd want to be part of this discussion on every meeting, and
We will.
be engaged. I don't want to miss on
No.
my staff miss anything as it relates to anything
Before
in
I
my
go,
district.
before I go out there, I will definitely set up an internal meeting with you guys and just sort of lay out what the meeting's going to look like. Then we'll all go out there together, and then after the meeting, we'll debrief, and I'll get your thoughts, and I'll compile it all into data.
Does this also include expiring use of developments in the city that may have had there might be a development that had, for the next 60 years, that the rents could go up only so much, and after 60 years, it expires?
Yeah.
Is this part of the discussion?
Somewhat. So, there certainly is a connection between affordable housing restrictions and land disposition agreements. my previous organization, Department of Neighborhood Development, keeps a very close watch on all of the properties that are expiring use in the city of Boston and what are low risk because they're owned by affordable housing developers, and even if that use expired, they would probably continue to operate them as affordable housing, and what are high risk because they are owned by for-profit developers, and they might be tempted to evict tenants if there weren't tenant protections in place. So we have very detailed data on exactly where those properties are, where those homes are, and there probably is some overlap between land disposition agreements and expiring use properties, but every expiring use property has a strategy to maintain its affordability.
Am I able to get that from either from you or D&D of exactly what
D&D,
properties might be
D&D
expired?
maintains that database. I'm sure they'd be happy to share.
Okay, I have asked for that in the past. So about the last thing I would ever want to see is putting up a major building as part of urban renewal, and then at the same time, not advocating for these elderly residents that are in an expired use. That'd be terrible for the city.
Yeah, I could not agree with you more. And there's a whole team of people at D&D, several staff members who do nothing but that, look at how to preserve the city's affordable housing and it's hard. It's hard work, particularly with some of these high-risk properties. But there are, in any way that the BPDA can be helpful, they know we're here to assist with those negotiations, and it's something that I think we all, as a city, should be looking very closely at.
There's a lot of city property that is being used for, different companies might be there having small businesses. Is that common throughout Boston where there's a parcel of land owned by the city and someone has a small business on that location?
No, it's actually fairly uncommon. I can think of only 3 examples, 2 in the BPDA's inventory, the 12th Channel and the Marine Park and the China Trade Center, both in your district, Councilor. The other example I can think of is the Bruce Bowling Municipal Building.
Okay. What do you think the role of the city council should be on this issue? I know what the role of the BPDA is, but what do you think the role of the city council should be?
So for any proposed changes we are making to the urban renewal plans, particularly if they're boundary changes, they would be considered major modifications, and we would need to seek city council approval for those changes as well as state through DHCD. And we think that those are the types of changes that we would be working on and coming back to the city council for. And in addition, we would also be looking at the urban renewals. Currently they're expiring in 2022. So if we were proposing to extend some of those plans, which we believe we will be seeking city council approval for those long-term extensions, as well as any short-term temporary ones that we would be looking for, working with DHCD as well.
Thank you. I'm friendly with the gentleman. He lives in Somerville now. His name's Jim Capano, and he has the West End Museum across in the Boston Garden. And so I frequently used to go in there, and I used to like looking at the old pictures of the great neighborhoods in Boston, especially the West End is the most diverse neighborhood in the country. And there's all types of ethnic groups living well together. And then under urban renewal, we dismantled a great American neighborhood. So that's where I'm coming from on this debate. I want to make sure that everything is when we do this, that the number one objective for me is the residents of the neighborhoods, making sure that our elderly can continue living in Boston, low-income people can continue living in Boston, families, our immigrant community as well. So I'm willing to work with you But in the back of my mind, I always think of my friend Jim Campano and the struggles of the West End residents, of how they were pushed out of the city under the guise of urban renewal. So that's where I'm coming from.
I certainly agree with you, Councilor, and I think my colleagues do as well. There's lots that we can learn from history about how urban renewal had many negatives in the past and wasn't always the most community-driven tool. But I think you've heard from us today that we're very engagement-focused, very community-driven focused, and this is really part of why then we've worked to rebrand the agency and why we no longer refer to ourselves as the BRA. We are the BPDA, and we're putting public engagement at the front of how we're using urban renewal in the future.
I can say my grandfather was actually displaced in Charlestown by urban renewal, and my mother, she was 4. So they both were. So I've heard the stories. I understand the pain. And when I came to work here, they were like, why? But the reason I did come to work here is because the people that are now on the 9th floor are not the people that were on the 9th floor back then. They care about the city. Everything that they try to do is for the right reasons, to protect the elderly, to protect people in need, to move the city forward into the city that it is now. So I'll be out there with them, and we're going to try to do our best.
No, thank you for that. And as I think you said it very well, as people that were displaced, even if they were displaced at age 3 or as little kids, that pain stays with them for the rest of their life. Even when you'll read these obituaries of elderly people that were displaced from the West End at an early age, they keep that love of that neighborhood with them for the rest of their life. So we have to always remember that when we're making decisions, that we're impacting people and we're impacting families, and we want to make sure that we treat everybody fairly and treat everybody with respect. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Flynn. I'm proud to serve with you, as always. I have a couple more questions on the community process, and then just a few on kind of the database part that you were talking about earlier. So just to make sure I have a completely clear understanding of what you're planning, you are right now planning just one meeting in each of these areas according to this timeline and the months designated, plus your office hours
Plus
as
the
needed.
office hours, yep. And, if one meeting isn't enough, I can certainly do another one. There's no limit.
Got it. So, but for now, the general plan is there will be at least
Yeah.
one meeting in each
Yeah,
area.
One booked, and then,
And there would almost certainly be additional meetings associated with like specific disposition
yeah,
planning.
any RFP would
Okay.
follow up those meetings.
And is it fair to say that, and what I heard is that it feels like you're treating these 6 a little bit differently than the rest, in that you may, because you're considering sunsetting these 6, you may go through parcel by parcel to have those specific conversations, but that in the other, let's just take the South End, for example, because it's big and because there was a lot of discussion in the authorization of the renewal process about what should happen in general. It didn't feel like there was time being, I think, Devin, you were saying that it might just be more about a broad plan submitted by the, early 2020 mark, that it might not get parcel by parcel within every single urban renewal area, so that likely the larger ones, because it would also be cumbersome, just to be more complicated to go parcel by parcel, that those will likely not have the same type of conversation about sunsetting and get into that level of detail of how to sunset it.
Yes, and also because those plans are much larger. I mean, they span a much larger area of the city, so.
Okay, and so when will you know how, for the ones that you are planning to extend, when will you know how many years you're going to seek an extension for, et cetera? Will that be in the proposal in early 2020 to DHCD?
We anticipate that, but at this point, we have a sense that we're going to be seeking an extension for something, but at this point in time right now, without that community process in place yet, we just don't know what that what that means or what that is right now.
But you're not creating enough room or time for Phase 2 and 3 urban renewal areas to get into the level of detail where it would be possible to go parcel by parcel to be talking about specific sunsetting by the time frame that you're saying you need to report back to DHCD by.
Well, again, what we are anticipating with DHCD is to go through the first phase to see how that turns out, how manageable that is, start the second phase, and then we'll get a sense of what the timeline looks like for, for examining a bigger urban renewal plan, especially one that spans different neighborhoods. And I think from there we'll have a better understanding and knowing. And so what we do anticipate is when we do our first proposal into DHCD in August, we can give them in our proposal, include what we think where this is headed in terms of, well, this is taking us this long, so we're anticipating that these next few might take longer than we anticipate or that we've set out here, and then sort of put that in place so that we can start talking to DHCD and this council and the community about where we are in that time frame.
Okay, so for example, with the South End, when you start the community process and having the meeting in January of 2020, you will be seeking their feedback on extending or not extending, but if extending, also by how many years? Or is that temporal, that length of time something that you will then kind of decide on your own after?
No, I mean, we're certainly going to be talking to the community about what the time frame
of it, okay.
looks like, particularly because we'll see what parcels still need to be put out for disposition.
Okay, great. So I think it sounds like we'll have a lot more detail on this kind of piece of it when we do the next check-in, which will come right after the August
Yes.
initial proposal anyway,
Yes.
which will have the feedback from these first 6. So I'll save the rest of those questions. That's so helpful, thank you. And I know, Chris has already been offering to meet all the time and all this, so I totally trust how diligent you are going to be in terms of following up.
If Phase 2 and Phase 3 need to be tweaked, whichever way you guys want to tweak them, we can do it. We can
Yeah.
make it happen.
Okay, and so my last batch of questions is on the public access to the LDA inventory. Have you gotten, so you talked about how the link is available now, where they can click to request, some sort of information being made available. Has anyone actually requested, or have you gotten inquiries so far?
Yeah, we've gotten a number of inquiries, a couple a day, mostly phone calls, that people that find my site. That's about it.
And then what type of information do you give them? When they ask for some information about a parcel, you provide the actual LDA language and anything else?
I do a little explanation because a lot of it's two types of people. It's generally kind of older people that are in panic mode of what is this, and does this mean I can't build an addition? And I sort of break down the community process of, like, it's similar to a ZBA. Like, I have to go out and host a meeting. You have to talk to your neighbors to make sure it's okay, and then instead of going to the zoning board, I take you to the BPDA board. And sort of calm them down that, like, there is a way to amend an LDA. It's not written in stone. We're flexible, certainly. You just have to make sure your neighbors are on board. That's the main question I get. We also get a ton of certificate of completion questions of people trying to make a sale, and this certificate of completion was just never issued or never signed, and I'll have to go out there and take a picture to make sure what's supposed to be there, whether it's open space or a garden, is there, and then I will take it to the board and issue the certificates, allow them to sell their property.
Got it, okay. And so I know we had, again, another recurring theme over these check-ins is about whether there should be direct public access to the LDAs, or it's kind of a moderated or kind of supervised access through a staff person in the agency. And it feels like you're kind of in a rhythm where you give a standard spiel about, if you're doing, here's the LDA and here's how to understand pieces of it. I still think that we should always be striving for as much direct transparency and access as possible, and that kind of extra language could be put somewhere, that people could then see the language and then also read the additional, and then call, here's Chris's number for more information, but I just know that there are some people who will, even the little barrier of clicking the link and having to wait to talk to someone is restricting access in some way that it doesn't feel like we need to be.
So we've certainly been making progress on that front. I spend most of my time thinking about the real estate that's still in our inventory, but the LDAs are critically important because they are what enforce the agreements that were put in place when the land was disposed of. And so it's a question my team gets, and we often funnel those questions over to Chris. So the progress we're making is we're going to be putting in the zoning viewer, which is an online tool where you can go in and see a map of properties or search by property. One of the highest traffic portions of the BPDA's website, we'll be putting all the urban renewal restrictions within the zoning viewer, so you can click on and see the restriction, whether there's one on your house or your neighbor's house or a house that you're thinking about. And then you can, from clicking to that, you can also you'll be able to get information around how to access an electronic version of that LDA by going to the registry of deeds. Why
not just let them access the LDA right there?
Because what we found with working with our IT people, that it is too onerous
I just don't
for
think
us
that's,
to do that.
I'm sorry, and I hate having the same conversation over and over again, but I have talked to numerous people outside government who are tech folks who say it is totally possible to come up with a tech solution to link different PDF documents to different.
But we're talking about linking thousands of documents, and we don't have the manpower. We just feel like it would be wasteful, especially since what we're finding is people aren't looking for it on our site. What they are looking for is how to understand it, and so we are using our resources to put into, being able to get the information as soon as possible so that we can help them understand it. But it would require, it's just, what we are finding is a waste of our resources when we have limited resources to prioritize with.
Okay, so I just personally am leaving it at the point where I fundamentally disagree with the restriction and think that it is actually not that big of a tech lift to accomplish something like this. There are folks in the audience who I think could even help with this. Whenever we have talked about it, I hear two pieces, that there's the tech kind of logistics of it, but then there's also this worry or desire to make sure that people are getting the right interpretation of the language and not just seeing it themselves directly without any guidance. So I'm still hearing both. I disagree with both, but I hope that the guidance piece can be resolved, because people should be able to just read the disclosures on their own.
So, Counselor, what we are also doing is providing the link to the registry, because that is the place where the documents, that's the, how would you describe it? It's the authoritative place, the final authoritative place to find the document. It's what title companies rely on, not what we might hold in our inventory, but what is at the registry. So we are providing that link to, so people know that, okay, if I have, or if there's an urban renewal restriction here, a land disposition agreement, a deed restriction, what have you, they could click on to the registry to get that document. It's just, on our website right now, we don't have the capability to have them click and open the document there, because we have not linked them, the documents.
Well, I'm new to this conversation, but I think that we're hopeful that by putting it in the zoning viewer, making it very transparent, the way that, and understand what properties have these restrictions, and then providing very transparent and clear instructions on how to get that actual document, that we'll be able to accomplish at least 80% of the value of what we're trying to achieve here. But we certainly understand the desire and need to allow public access to restrictions and to be able to provide interpretive services, and also just the way to get that legal document itself.
Great. Okay. And then my final question is, given that it is complicated and there are many different parcel by parcel considerations that you will be going through in this community process, et cetera, are you planning to create sort of a summary by each urban renewal area of what the major, here's all the parcels within this urban renewal area that have open space restrictions. Here are all the ones that have affordable housing covenants attached to them, just so that people could see in kind of a one-pager.
Yeah, we have a lot of the data already, but certainly after the community engagement process and, people write in, I'll formulate, consolidate all that information and individually in each area and issue.
But even, I'm just saying, even before the feedback, could we just get a summary area by area of essentially the parcels groups by type of extra urban renewal consideration that's added on there, whether it's the open space restriction or affordable housing covenant or any other types of?
I think we have a lot of that. Yeah, we definitely do.
Okay.
I think it was generally provided in some of the update that Janet Carlson had presented, so we can pull from that information and
great.
fill it in.
Yeah, okay, so that would be my ask for next time, when we do the next check-in, is to be reviewing the update, the initial proposal that you're giving to DHCD, and then these kind of summaries of how the different parcels fit within the kind of one-pagers, if you will, of Janet's work by urban renewal restriction, by urban renewal area. Okay, so do you have any other questions, Councilor Flynn?
I just had one question. As it relates to the downtown waterfront on Phase 2, can you give me a little bit of background information on that?
What do you mean? The agenda for the meeting, or?
Yeah, what you hope to accomplish?
Just like to get feedback on, how people feel, number one, about urban renewal in the area. I'd like people to walk away looking at what urban renewal has done in terms of improvements, and in terms of commerce and making the city what it is today. In terms of areas we own, just continued feedback on what they think should go on some of those lands. And the final phase being, like, should we extend or terminate?
And certainly as we get into these presentations, we'll provide very detailed stats on what is in each urban renewal area. And like stat I have in front of me on that particular one is just there are 19 parcels within the downtown waterfront urban renewal area.
Okay.
We can talk about what each one of those 19 is being currently used for, what its future use might be. Many of them in that particular urban renewal area are in their sort of end use and leased out with long-term ground leases.
Have you had any interaction with the Greenway as part of the downtown waterfront planning?
I think that's probably a great question for our planning department to answer, and I think it probably extends well beyond the urban renewal. I think personally, I have not, I don't think Chris has, but there's certainly a lot of interaction between the Greenway Association and the BPDA on a regular basis, but just not necessarily with this particular team.
And the reason I ask, maybe you're the wrong group to ask, but I do ask about it frequently, is I represent most of the Greenway, and the Greenway towards the New England Aquarium is beautiful. And as you walk further down towards Chinatown, and when you get into Chinatown, the Greenway is struggling in that area. And I've expressed this to the Greenway folks, that we can't have a Greenway that's beautiful in one area and not beautiful in another area. It's about consistency, and it's about respect for the communities of the downtown area, but also it's about respect for the community of the Chinatown area as well. I'm just using that as an example as it relates to urban renewal, that we want to be consistent, and we want to be sure that every neighborhood benefits, and every neighborhood feels like they're heard and they are respected in this process. So going forward, I continue to advocate that we need to do a better job of listening and helping communities that have had that may not have the political influence, but they deserve to have their voice heard just as well. And I use that as the case with the Greenway, because I'm not happy with it, because the Greenway in the Chinatown area is not something that's acceptable to me.
Yeah. I think I speak for all of my team members of the BPDA when we say we completely share those values. That is 100%. You've heard from Chris about how he'll be approaching the community engagement and making sure we're equitable, inclusive, and fair in the way we talk about our property inventory, when we bring people into property disposition conversations, and what we're prioritizing, right, and making sure that we're doing just as good a job in every neighborhood. Just as good a job in Roxbury as we're doing downtown. It's really critically important to us. For the Greenway specific example, we'll certainly take that back to our colleagues, and I think it's likely something that they're already thinking about and worried about alongside you.
Yeah, no concern will go overlooked. I'm from Charlestown, and we always feel overlooked, but so I'll take that forward and that feeling and make sure that every community is equal.
Yeah, that's important to me, and in not overlooking anyone is critical, and I mean that in action. When you have a meeting in Chinatown, I want to see the right interpreters there that communicate to the residents in Cantonese and Mandarin in locations in the South End.
Yeah, 100%. I'll meet with you and your team before any public meeting to make sure everything's on board and you guys are satisfied.
And for any disposition conversation, that's certainly a lens we take to before we go to a community meeting. We just did one on the Little Mystic Channel in Charlestown, where there's a nearby Cantonese-speaking population. Yep. So we provided interpretive services and simultaneous translation services, and that's a very important part of the way we do business. And
particularly picking the community room that we choose, I want something that's easily accessible for elderly and other people. So I'll work with you and everyone else that I can.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate those comments. And the same thing in the South End. I have a large Spanish-speaking population in there as well. And in South Boston, we have a Somalian community. And making sure that we are able to communicate to residents in a language that they speak is critical. And as you said, making sure that our elderly and persons with disabilities also have equal access to these hearings as well, because their voice will certainly need to be heard just as much as, the banker from State Street. Yeah. His voice will be heard. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn. Thank you, everyone, for your testimony and for all of your work on this. I really appreciate all of your time. And feel free to stay, or I know you have busy schedules as well. Right now, we have, again, 4 people signed up in the first bunch, and that's it so far. I'll call members of the public. Feel free to line up at either public testimony microphone. Dave Goggins, Victor Bronya, Ford Cavallari, and Elliot Laffer.
Thank you, Councilor Wu and Councilor Flynn. I'm Dave Goggins. I serve on the Executive Committee of the North End Waterfront Resident Association, and appreciate you holding this meeting here today to update us on the progress that the BPDA has made with respect to the Urban Renewal Program. I just have a couple of quick points that I'd like to make. First is I hope that the Council will continue to demonstrate their interest in maintaining accountability in terms of sticking with the original timeline for sunsetting provisions with respect to urban development, particularly with respect to the downtown neighborhoods where we've probably had too much urban renewal going on as of late. Second, I hope that as demonstrated today by both your comments with respect to explanations for transparency, that you'll continue to hold the BPDA's feet to the fire and not accept answers that something's too onerous or too complex for either the public to understand or appreciate. Transparency is very important in this, particularly when it comes to the BPDA's stated commitment to community process and input. Unfortunately, the BRA and the BPDA have earned a reputation for either not reaching out for community input before moving ahead with large development plans, or have held community meetings where it's been basically lip service, and whatever feedback they've gotten from the community in the past hasn't really been incorporated into their plans going forward. And lastly, my concern from what I've heard today revolves around the fact of the plans for actually going out and getting incorporating a community process into this. I'm not really sure that I understand the reasoning behind the different phases that BPDA is proposing. I think it would serve the community better if they could, when they come out to visit with the different urban renewal zones in the communities, that they incorporate all of the LDAs that are within that zone for consideration and discussion, and not focus in on just a few or the largest or the more complex ones, so that the community can better understand whether or not urban renewal is something that's necessary or beneficial to their individual neighborhoods. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Is this on? Yes, it is on. I think I made a mistake. I think I should have asked to have public testimony prior to the BRA testimony, because my questions are addressed to them, not to you. The first one is not a particularly significant one, but it's interesting to me. That is the numbers of all of the BRA's land holdings. This comes to me from the report of the committee chair, Bill Linehan, to the council, March 21, 2016, where he quotes Brian Golden as saying that he will provide that information. Does that mean the parcel numbers of the holdings of the BRA, or does it mean how many? I'd be curious to know, does the BRA have 1,000 parcels that it owns, or 5,000 parcels that it owns? My next question relates to the disposition of BRA-owned land. And this may be the elephant in the room. Does that include income-producing BRA properties? Specifically, this has to do with the North End. I should have introduced myself as chair of Zoning, Licensing, and Construction Committee of the North End Waterfront Residents Association. This relates specifically to the North End and an issue that came up a week ago at a North End meeting where the city and the BRA had proposed several months ago a new community facility for the North End. They had seemingly predetermined where to put it on the waterfront, and at the meeting months ago, the community said, how about considering other areas? One would be the Fulton Street parking lot owned by the BRA. The other would be Sergeant's Wharf, owned by the BRA. The consultants came back to the community a week or so ago, and those two, actually, every alternative location was rejected by the consultants, and they told us that the original location they were sticking to. It seemed obvious, and I asked this question, and I'm relating this based on the response I got, that a major reason why those two parcels were rejected by the consultant was because they are income-producing parcels for the BRA, Fulton Street parking lot and Sergeant's Wharf. So when we're talking about disposition of BRA land, are we including that? Because if the BRA income-producing land is disposed of, the BRA goes out of business. Is that something that we can anticipate for the future? And the final question actually isn't a question, it's a comment. I have been around long enough to recall that when Edward J. Logue was brought as what was then called Development Administrator from Connecticut to Boston by Mayor Collins, he insisted that planning be added to the powers of the BRA. And by special legislation in 1963, it was taken from the council. I would simply like to get into the public conversation. Why shouldn't the council, why shouldn't the planning function of the city be returned to the council? Because we've seen, especially with the new faces on the council, the direct connection that the councilors have with their constituents. It has been marvelous for me to see, and I thank you and all the other councilors for that attitude that you've taken. I would like to see planning go back to the council because the planners would then be in direct contact with those for whom they are planning. And that concludes my comments and
Thank you very
questions.
much.
Hello, good morning. My name is Ford Cavallari. I'm the chair of ADCO, the Alliance of Downtown Civic Organizations, whose members include the 9 largest resident associations of downtown, from Fenway to Chinatown, from the North End to the South End. I want to address what I think has become an elephant in the room after 2.5 hours, where it hasn't really been talked about. The urban renewal zones are edifices of the late 50s and early 60s and were never intended to last this long. That's the reason why there have been so many 10-year renewals. And the last meeting that we had on the last 10-year renewal, which became a 6-year renewal because it's the first time there's been serious pushback on this renewal, and the first time a lot of folks in the community have said, just a second, we don't need these edifices from the 50s any more than we need Cadillacs with huge tail fins on them. I want to remind everyone that that is the fact, and I feel as if a lot of the process that we just heard about is intended to memorialize the existing urban renewal zones rather than get rid of them. I'll point out a couple of facts, and I want to refer folks who are interested to go to www.adco.boston. In our zoning area, we have a presentation up, the same presentation we shared with the City Council 3 years ago when we made the argument that maybe we should really seriously think about sunsetting these beasts. Some facts about Boston: over 2/3 of the BRA construction projects, including those in Alston, Brighton, off of the Pike, including the Seaport, including the East Boston construction, there are no urban renewal zones. We don't need urban renewal zones to do construction. That's just simply not true. Secondly, there's plenty of affordable housing, and there are plenty of restrictions and covenants in places outside of the urban renewal zones. And the fact that it took close to 3 years to do an inventory of LDAs was a bit disappointing, but I think that inventory should have been understood to be a precursor to how to transfer those LDAs to other entities, rather than simply collect the LDAs and say, look what we got, and let's keep doing this for another 20 years. And the third thing is, Victor mentioned the revenue-generating properties. I'll point out that, you know, the Sergeant's Wharf parking lot is the second largest revenue generator in the non-grant category, according to the McKinsey report that was commissioned by the mayor shortly after he came into office that analyzed the BRA. The largest parking lot, the largest revenue generator, is down at the cruise terminal. That is not in an urban renewal zone, and yet it's a BRA-owned property. The BRA owns plenty of property that is not in these zones. So I keep hearing the conflation of the need to keep urban renewal zones alive with property disposition, with development of big projects, and we'll not have any more big skyscrapers unless we have these things, and conflation of that with affordable housing. And I want to say, stop. These are artifacts of a bygone time, and they hurt us. They heard us. And I can tell you that our associations want sunsetting as quickly as possible of all the zones in our area, including West End, North Station, Government Center, Downtown Waterfront, South Station, and all other central business districts, including those tiny little parcels like Essex, Park Plaza, South Cove, South End, and Fenway. We want them gone. We see that there's no need for these, and sure, there are some LDAs that need to be transferred. Well, that's why, we have such a powerful staff at the BPDA, BRA, to be able to do stuff like that. And I want to conclude by saying, I'm not saying that to Victor's point about, if you get rid of the revenue generators, maybe the BRA would no longer be funded. I don't want to get rid of the BRA. I want the BRA to look forward rather than backwards. And there has been plenty of stuff that the BRA has done looking forward, but this backward look at the urban renewal zones keeps us from doing cool planning things and cool development things that a lot of other cities are doing. I'll point out in Hong Kong, their BRA equivalent works hand in hand with a transportation group that does the subway, and that subway actually is not losing money but making money because they do linkage between transportation planning and real estate development, and they make sure that subways and other badly needed infrastructure, which we need really badly in the city, is paid for through that linkage. We think that that kind of forward thinking is something that the BRA should be retasked to doing, because you guys could do it better than Hong Kong is doing it. But unfortunately, we're stuck in this mode where we're looking backward, we're trying to memorialize these beasts, these elephants, and just enough. Let's stop that and let's start moving forward and doing really positive stuff for the city rather than inventorying to death the stuff that is from 50 years ago. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, Councilor, I'm Elliot Laffer. I'm a member and a board member of the Neighborhood Association Back Bay, but I'm speaking here as an individual who's been involved in community review and major projects for a very long time. And the thing that strikes me is that for all of that very long time, which started before my daughter, who's now a professor, who's been out of her PhD program for almost 10 years, was born, we were talking about how obsolete urban renewal seemed to be in the city of Boston. Well, if it was obsolete 40 years ago, it's certainly obsolete-er today. Ford, who's a very, very hard act to follow, really raised the issue that we can and have successfully built major projects that aren't in urban renewal zones, and the projects that I've been involved with have almost all, actually I think I can say all, been outside urban renewal zones, have had, when it gets structured properly, really good community process, have led to very successful developments, and we expect will lead to more successful developments. This is a tool that was misused at its birth, and most things that are misused at their birth don't get better as they get older. They just leave a lot of debris behind them. We need to clean up the debris. We need to make urban renewal go away. We need to have the city's planning authority, agency, whatever we want to call it, do real forward planning. And we need to continue to build out what is the best city to live in the United States and make it the best city to live in the world. And we won't do that if we keep looking back at urban renewal. Thanks.
Thank you. And the last person I have signed up is Richard Giordano.
Councilors, thank you for the opportunity to testify or ask questions. For the record, my name is Richard Giordano from the Fenway Community Development Corporation. I had one specific question for our presenters. It was unclear to me if in those community meetings they're talking about putting absolutely all of the urban renewal area up for discussion, and they're asking the community to comment on everything, or simply on the lots that the BRA doesn't think are buildable and worthwhile. And in either case, will there be a sort of feasibility session to part of the planning? If you're asking people to help you plan and they come up with suggestions, then you have to also give them the tools to make an analysis as to whether or not that's a good suggestion or come up with something else. If they plan and ask for a high-rise on a parcel, you might want to help them with financial planners or with, architects to say, well, really, this can't fly at this spot, or it is economically feasible. So the planning needs to empower people to give you a solid opinion. But the first question is everything up on the table? Are they asking everyone to comment on all of it? Or is the BRA holding back the parcels that they have a particular purpose for and want to build on? But the rest of this, I would like to echo what Ford said. We need real coordinated planning, not what's going on right now. A case in point is Kenmore Square. We have the BU data science building being proposed. We have the related Beal project to knock down most of the buildings at the Citgo sign and rebuild. We have Mark Development looking to put a huge hotel on the parcel owned by, they own, that locates the Citizens Bank at Brookline, Beacon, and Comm Ave. The Buckminster Hotel has a hold on a proposal to build there. None of this is being coordinated with transit improvements. The only thing that's happening is related Beal is going to make a little improvement to the head house and the stairs going down to the Green Line station. There's no question about figuring out capacity for the Green Lines, the buses. How do these 5 projects interact with mass transit? Ford's point is so well taken. And I also mistakenly thought that the purpose of this process was to figure out how to end the urban renewal programs, not to extend them. So to hear that we could come out of this with an extension of them is fairly surprising. Where are we going with urban renewal? It's pretty obvious we don't need it. There's development happening all over. And for that matter, I would like to comment that in many cases, the development we're getting is not the development we need. And it is not being planned for. It's simply being facilitated and accommodated. The example could be the towering excess report that Institute for Policy Studies put out, showing us how much of the luxury high-rise condos are simply cash storage vaults for speculators who want to get money out of a country, for EB5 investors, and many of them are empty or occupied at least very, very few days of the year. If that's the kind of development we're facilitating, we'd better take a step back and figure out, as Councilor Flynn was saying, how we do development that benefits the residents of Boston, in particular, the folks earning less than $100,000 or $150,000. What about the folks who are here? That's the kind of planning that we need. And if we're going to put out urban renewal areas, let's have planning that helps facilitate that stuff. We don't need more Millennium Towers. Thank you.
Thank you, Rich. Would anyone else from the public or staff like to testify? Hearing none. Councilor Flynn, do you have any closing statements?
No. Thank you, Councilor.
Thank you. This will conclude today's hearing on docket number 0736, the biannual urban renewal progress update. Next one likely around September of 2019. Thank you very much, and this hearing is adjourned.